going here today. Thank you everyone for joining. As I mentioned, this is Boast.ai and another installment of our webinar series. Today we are covering the SaaS sales book. I'm Russ Armstrong. I'm with Boast.ai. I lead up the business development efforts for Eastern North America for Boast.ai. As you can see here previously, where I got a lot of my experience in SaaS sales, I was a co-founder of Limelight Platforms, where we raised over $10 million. We were selling into enterprise SaaS, and through a lot of trial and error, developed a process design that started to really gel and help us grow our company. So off the back of that, with a lot of insights and a lot of help from other industry experts, I put together a playbook that I'm excited to share with everybody today. Prior to that, I was a institutional equity trader at RBC Capital Markets. I did that for about a decade before I got the entrepreneur's bug and went off to start a technology company. All right, enough about me. Let's jump into the presentation here. As some of you probably would realize, in the early stages of a company, typically you'll see the founders who have domain expertise or industry contacts that are already existing, make up the significant first sales of a company, which is totally great. That's how you get your kind of early stage and early proof of concept. But how do you turn this into a repeatable, scalable sales model? That is the real question. And when I say repeatable and scalable, repeatable is being able to turn your domain expertise and your domain contacts into a value proposition that is going to work with strangers. So that's your first step that you need to work on. And then scaling that is, what processes do I need to put in place that allow new hires to stay on script and on target to continue to grow and scale your company? So those are the two challenges that a lot of early stage companies are facing when they are growing their sales teams. So let's take a step back a little bit here, just kind of talking about Revenue 101 and the three possible ways you can grow your revenue. Obviously, you can add more customers, more users. That's kind of the focus of what we're really going to dive into today. But the other avenues, which are totally separate webinars on their own, are increasing your average selling price and also increasing your purchasing frequency. But we're going to focus on the first one, is adding more customers. So first off in your process is obviously you need to define your customer. So this is a process where you're going to do an exercise with your team to identify your ICP, your ideal customer profile, focusing on figuring out your industry, your company, some of the other things that actually matter when you're going through it. Figuring out what their buyer persona is, so job titles that are relevant to buying it, what that personality type is in those job titles. Are they managers? Are they directors? Are they C-suite? Some of the responsibilities they might have. Some of the challenges they have in their current roles, and the KPIs that they're actually measuring. Those KPIs are absolutely critical to understanding how to sell into them. If you are trying to sell them on KPIs that are not on their radar or not things that they are measuring, it is going to be a very difficult uphill battle. So actually understanding those KPIs is critical throughout the process. So once you understand these and you've mapped it out, you obviously need to figure out what your value proposition is. And this is one of the traps I see a lot of people in early stage companies get into. I got into this trap myself. And the whole idea is, what value does your customer get? And it's not, what does your product do? So not we are, or we do, or we make this easier. What is the value proposition that the actual buyer gets from it? Is it saving time? Is it increased sales? And then diving into those to be a little more specific as you run through it. And obviously also understanding when you do these this exercise is understanding what matters to this customer. So trends in the industry is there technology adoption that's happening? Is it a fast changing environment, slow changing environment? Trying to create some FOMO that their competitors are doing these things. Does ROI matter to these customers, or are they not even measuring on ROI? Or is it increasing sales? Depends on what type of product you're selling, but those are the things that are matter there. And then the last step of that is you're going to need content, and that's content to support all of these things in the different buyer journey and the different stages of your buyer. So you're going to have to build out your content around that. And I'll jump into some of these things in a little more detail as we go through it. First, I just want to talk quickly about styles of positioning. So obviously, when you're launching into market, there are a few different styles that you can go to. Head-to-head is obviously where there's an existing category but no clear leader. And it's easy to understand what that category is, but competition is really fierce. So that's kind of the head-to-head model where you can position yourself. The other one is big fish, small pond, where it's a sub-segment of unmet needs. I mean, the best example of this would be a sub-segment of a CRM. We all know who the leader is in the CRM segment, Salesforce, but there are certain features that don't work for certain niches. So maybe you are the CRM for doctors, lawyers, real estate agents, accountants, whatever it might be. You have features or a feature set that distinguishes you from those. And the most difficult one, which a lot of startups find themselves in, is the obviously creating a new sector. That's category creation, and it is the most difficult by far because you are not only contacting your prospects, telling them they have a problem that they don't know they have, but you're also trying to sell them a solution they don't know they need. So definitely the hardest, the longest tailed, the longest sales cycles would be in that category. So jumping back to that value proposition, which I do want to spend a little bit of time on, and in simple terms, what does this actually mean? What value are you providing to the user of your software? A great example that I like to talk about is kind of Uber when we talk about that. You know, when we go to somebody and say we're the ride-sharing marketplace, what does that mean? That's just so ambiguous and so hard to kind of understand. Versus you saying to someone, get a ride in 4 minutes or less, it's a little more impactful. I'd like to dissect this a little bit further. When Uber was going public, I was looking at their S1 filing, and they broke it down in the most simple way I could possibly explain it. And their aim is to be a safe, reliable, affordable, and convenient trip within a few minutes of tapping a button. There is no mention of an app. There is no mention of a marketplace or ride sharing. It's just the value that that person gets, which brings them in. People want safe, people want reliable, affordable, convenient. They want all of these things. So these are the values that they're getting out of it. And that's what's going to draw them in the first place. Without being upfront with your values, you're not going to spark the interest you need. And this is an early problem we see a lot of people have with, we like to call it word salad, where you're trying to say too many things about what you do and you're not coming down to that bare minimum value proposition, which opens up your conversation. Going to jump back into that positioning and how to positioning. And here's a great exercise that you guys can do at home to kind of figure out where you are. So on a competitive analysis, if you didn't exist, what would your customers use currently? A great way to kind of understand where that is on the competitive landscape. Key unique attributes, what features or capabilities do you have that alternative solutions do not have? This is how you're going to sell on differentiators that you have in the market versus others. Value, again, back into this value proposition and understanding what that value is for those customers. Customers that care. Who cares a lot about these values? Is it a sub-segment? Is it a broad segment? And understanding who these people are. And that, again, comes back into that talking of understanding who that ICP is and identifying them and actually mapping the content and the messaging you have against that. And then market to win, and this is what context makes your value obvious to your customers and to your customers. All right, so that's kind of on the early stages of setting up your sale or your marketing and the material and your value proposition and your messaging and elevator pitch. Those are the things you need to think about when you're setting that side of it up. I'm going to jump a little bit into your sales process now and understanding what that looks like. Here's a broad overview to understand the people on the business side who will be working in your sales and marketing team. Your marketing team, what they will be doing, some of the activities, and then the KPIs you need to track them against. You could also have this for your business development representatives. Here's the activities that they will be doing, and here's the KPIs that they'll be measured against, as well as your account executives, what they will be working on, and your bookings. A huge part of the process is that activate and customer success, and this all depends on the type of product you have. If you have a very long-tailed, upsell-heavy product, then you're going to have customer success account managers who are managing a lot of this stuff. And if you're very much more one sale and done, you're going to have a lot lower touch on your customer success. All of these matter, and you're going to throttle up your teams depending on where you fit on the spectrum. So let's talk about some quick metrics that are kind of the key go-tos in the industry that if you are raising it and you are reporting back into your CFO, CEOs, you will need to have down and nailed. So understanding your customer acquisition costs, pretty simple calculation, your ARPU, which is your average revenue per user, and then obviously your lifetime value. This is often a tough one in early stage companies if you have low churn and large contracts on the enterprise level. Generally, what I recommend is estimating a lifetime value of it to allow you to do some of these calculations. The rule of thumb is obviously having a 3-to-1 ratio or greater. As you can imagine, if you're at 1-to-1, which we'll show here, at a 1-to-1 ratio, you are just paying back your costs. You're never going to make money. And as you move up the spectrum, the better your unit economics are, the more scalable your process is, where you can add more resources to your team and still be effective. Talk quickly about the different sales team structures. And this really will depend on the level and the how far along you are as a company as well. In the early stages, islands are definitely the most popular team structures, where you'll have an end-to-end solution where you might have an account executive prospect, convert, close, and activate across the spectrum. It is a tough process, and it only really works in small teams when you're starting to scale. As soon as you can start to specialize any of these stages is when you start to move to an assembly line. And that assembly line will include BDRs, AEs. That could include your customer success, your account managers, depending on the type of sales process that you have and how you fit into the spectrum. Obviously, a good rule of thumb is that an SDR team will have a positive return if their average contract value is higher than $8,000. And your rule of thumb also is pod revenue. Once you move into a pod type structure where you have specialization into channels, industries, products, countries, you need a 2 times pod to salary cost to make it make sense. Here's an interesting design when we talk about process and design for sales and how important it is to focus on the process first as opposed to focusing on the superstar culture. And here's the biggest difference. When you look at a superstar culture and creating an environment for sales around your top performing executives, those superstars might have unique attributes that allow them to close any deal, talk to any person, sell anything. The problem with that superstar culture is it's not scalable and it's not repeatable. If you work backwards from a process, messaging, and value proposition aspect, you'll be able to develop the framework needed and then layer on your technology, layer on enablement skills, teach your skills to those people to help them close those deals, and you'll have a lot more progress and a lot more success with your sales teams if you focus on that process first. Here's one of my favorite charts, which really helps people at an early stage kind of understand where they are on the spectrum of what they should be doing in terms of what their sales teams should look like. As you'll see on the vertical part, you have deals per month. On the horizontal, it's average contract value. And you'll see that obviously when you have a high deals per month and low contract value, you're going to be up in the freemium and web sales where there's very low touch. And then as you start to gravitate towards higher contract value and lower sales per month, you're going to move into online sales, inside sales teams, potentially into field sales and local sales when you start to get into enterprise solutions that you're selling in. And then with that, you can see how there's different strategies and selling methodologies that will work in different situations. So from transactional, where it's very much, you're picking amongst a lot of different solutions out there, all the way to consultative solution selling, where you are actually finding out what their needs are and selling into them. You could fit your provocative selling, where you're more living in the spectrum, where you're a category creation, where you're selling and, you're helping educate your buyer about the issues they might have or how they might be able to do their job better. And as you're doing that, you are teeing up selling your product in while you're doing that. Provocative selling usually involves a lot of workshops, getting multiple stakeholders in a room. And then also there's your ABM approach, which you'll start to see anywhere on the late stages of inside sales, field sales, and load sales, where you'll have an ABM, an account-based marketing approach to actually selling into them. I kind of touched on a bit of these examples here, and the slide deck will be available after, so you can dive into some of the definitions a little bit more at your leisure. But I did cover off some of these already as we were talking. So one of the key things on a larger scale, if you're doing more enterprise sales or large SMB sales, a lot of the new techniques are around account-based marketing. And how it differs from your traditional marketing is in your original funnel, you're just going to have individuals at the top of your funnel where you're talking about prospects. And those prospects live at the top of the funnel, and you're trying to move them through your funnel to the middle of the funnel to the bottom of your funnel. In account-based marketing, you are starting with the companies. So you're identifying who are your top 100, top 1,000 companies, top 10,000 companies that you want to identify and go after, and really understand what those companies are. From there, you're going to try and find your key influencers or stakeholders who make those decisions. And then you have to learn how to engage those people within that company. And those engagements can be through a bunch of different techniques, through direct mailing, through targeted ad campaigns, where there's some vendors out there that can help you with those ABM strategies, all in the effort to gain consensus across the organization, so you can have multiple stakeholders who are your champions within the organization, which will help you close the deal. So that's the basis of an account-based marketing strategy. As I circle back here to that ABM and that circle of influence, I just want to share kind of a quick story on some of the learnings I had previously at Limelight and running a team. We were selling an enterprise SaaS solution into automotive, actually. So we were selling into global OEMs where there are 13 conglomerates that control 54 sub-brands across the world. They all are unique within their local jurisdictions. I'm located here in Toronto, and a unique attribute of all the OEMs in Canada is all the head offices are located in one place. They're all located in Toronto. So I'm going to scroll back a couple slides here to help illustrate my points on this. So in effect, when we were selling in Canada with all the headquarters here, our inside sales team effectively acted like a local sales team because we were co-located with all of those OEMs. Fast forward and trying to scale your operations into the US, and we no longer had that advantage where we had that inside sales team that was co-located, where we had a localized influence and localized circle of influence, as we were looking at here. In the Toronto market, we were able to penetrate deep into the buyer's circle of influence, where we were able to influence friends, families, colleagues, conferences. We were able to show up at in the community where people were starting to talk about us, and there was a buzz within the location. But when we expanded into the US, we found because the headquarters were located in different jurisdictions, you might have Toyota and Honda out in California, you have Porsche and Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta, you have BMW and Jaguar Land Rover in New York, and then you obviously have the big three in Detroit. Our inside sales team was not as effective as influencing this circle of influence in those US markets, which ultimately led us to the conclusion that we needed to shift to a localized model in the US to duplicate our success that we had in Canada. All right, so now you know what kind of structure you want to put in place across the spectrum. Here we're going to look at a few of the different sales funnel definitions, and these are tangible definitions that you can take home and use. So in a broad strokes, and you can always define this even further, but on a bare minimum, you're going to have your awareness, you're going to have education, you're going to have your selection process. And then on the right side of this is after they've committed, the onboarding, the using, and growing, which is a key component of SaaS and enterprise sales. There are a ton of enterprise solutions which are modeled after growing after initial sale. So the resources put into the right side of this funnel is just as great as the resources put into the beginning side of this funnel. And that is a whole different seminar on its own, talking about growing it, and we will possibly connect with one of those in the future. Right now, we're going to focus on the prospecting side of the funnel and getting people to commit on at least a pilot or an early stage deal with your company. All right, so defining KPIs, you can track your metrics across the progress that your prospects are making. So from labeling someone a prospect in the awareness stage to an MQL, where your marketing team might have qualified somebody based off of a lead score count from downloading certain items or visiting websites, to having a qualified conversation with someone, it's an SQL, to qualifying that person as a lead because they might have hit certain criteria, such as a BANT model, where they have budget, authority, need, and a timeline that all fits in line with someone who would actually purchase your solution. So all of these are different definitions of how you'll be able to track progress, how you'll be able to track velocity of that person throughout your pipeline as you run through it. There are some definitions that you can put to practical use when you're building out your team that you can revisit so everybody is on the same page. One of the key components of having good data to be able to understand what's working and what isn't is to have very real and apparent definitions of what those are. It is critical that everybody is on the same page and is using the same qualification metrics to label somebody, because if people are using different definitions, then you're going to have issues with your data and understanding what segments need help, what segments need acceleration, and whatnot across the spectrum. So here is a list of the definitions that you can use in some of your qualifications and some of your processes that you're building out. Sales accepted lead is when your SQL is qualified or disqualified based off of what they were doing. If they are not qualified, they usually go into a nurture stream. And this is where that data comes really important. So understanding what your conversion metrics and conversion rates, and from here you can get even more detailed into time and velocity. So understanding, are people getting stalled at certain sections? You might be able to identify certain issues with teams, content, messaging, timing, whatever it might be. This is how you identify how to really dive deep into that process and where your holes are and where you need to plug those holes to speed up and accelerate your sales cycles. And then obviously, why it is important to do this is you need to map the buyer journey and understand the content that you're going to have to create to help people move through the funnel a lot quicker. There is obviously top of the funnel content, which is very much more awareness campaigns where you'll have general infographics where you're trying to gather people at a very high level to have interest in the overall industry and sub niches of what you're selling. So you're going to need to have infographics, customer pain stories that are very emotional for people. And as you move through the buyer journey into education, when someone is already an MQL, you are going to start to pull out different types of things like your educational guides, white papers, customer case, case studies that they would use in some comparison guides so they can understand what is out there in the market. These are more educational, middle of market types of material. And then at the bottom of the funnel, when you're trying to close somebody, it's when they need to go out, and if you think about it this way, they need to go build a business case to go talk to their manager and tell them why they need to do this. And it could be ROI stories, it could be calculator to help them do this. It could be you helping them walk through that business case that they need to build. And then at the larger scale, your bottom of funnel content could get even more detailed in terms of creating workshops, especially if you are selling in the category creation sector, where you'll need to have a workshop to educate the team on how the bar is moving higher for them to deliver on even more than they're currently delivering are. How do you make them look like rock stars? You can develop workshops around these where you'll go in, you'll talk to them, you'll talk to a team members, you'll get everybody on consensus and on board at the same time. And this is bottom of funnel content that you'll have to create to help close some of these deals. So that's kind of a quick 25-minute walkthrough of how you need to build your sales process and design. And I always think it's pretty helpful to walk through some industry averages to understand what people are doing in the SaaS industry. So I looked at some of the industry leaders in calculating some of this, like the Bridge Group, and I pulled together some data to help us understand where you live in that spectrum here. And some of that could be into things that you need to take into consideration when you start to ramp up your sales team, like how long does it take to ramp up in AE? And this is all matters in terms of your fundraising, your investor story. You know, if you're going to take 6 months to ramp up an AE and you're modeling for it to be in 3 months, you might have some issues with that. So just understanding where that is, and also understanding where your average rep tenure is, because you're going to have cycles where your AEs are going to leave. So if the average rep tenure is only 2.4 years, you're going to have to be scaling up people at a lot, which you'll have to put a factored forecast estimate out there to account for some of these metrics, especially at the early stage when you don't have a large team. So this is also looking at here, it is the percentage of pipe sourced from your outbound sales development reps. So as you can see, this kind of all maps back onto the spectrum of what type of process you should be having. The lower the contract value, the lower the amount of sales development reps that exist, which means the lower the amount of pipe that exists there. And then obviously as you get into the 50, 100K and larger range, you start to see more sales development reps, more assembly line type processes for building out teams, where you'll see more of that pipeline derived from there. You'll still notice that there is, say up to 40% is from your sales development reps. You're going to have a breakdown of marketing generated and account executive generated as well. Here we're talking about the percentage of pipe sourced from marketing, and you'll see as the deal gets larger, so if you're selling enterprise solutions such as ERPs, marketing's not going to get this over the line. You are going to need people on the ground, people in localized sales roles who are influencing those buyers on an individual level in that market, and here's the data that backs that up. And then obviously on the lower side, where you have a more freemium model or online sales models, you are not going to be able to support the customer acquisition costs to get to a 3-to-1 ratio unless you have a very marketing-driven pipeline. When do I know to go to an assembly line? When does it make sense to do that? And you can see kind of industry averages here. People start shifting towards an assembly line when you have deals, average contract sizes north of 25,000. And up, you'll see towards 100,000, that's 83% of teams are in a assembly line type model. Salaries, I get this question a lot, especially at early stages, and understanding where do we pay people? What is the average quotas? How do I structure payments for AEs, for CSMs? And this is an industry basis of people and how they should do it. It is always very difficult to structure comp models for early stage companies, especially when a variance on a sales target could be plus or minus 50% when you're an early stage company, to try and do 50% on the commission side. My best advice for that for early stage companies is make your quotas attainable at early stages. That's how you're going to keep reps engaged, keep reps on target and with your company. At that early stage, it is critical that you have people who know your product, who can run with the process, as opposed to trying to reset at a constant basis, trying to find new untrained sales reps to kind of move your product along. Another thing I see at early stage companies is a underinvestment in CSMs. Your customer success managers are the front lines of keeping your customers happy, understanding their usage patterns, understanding their feedback, and being able to grow and upsell your product through the organization. I see a lot of teams that underspend on this area, and it is critical to the growth of your company. If you're on the more higher kind of spectrum of ACV, to have a solid and educated and experienced CSM team. At 100% of quota, your average commission rates are about 10% of your ACV. So just some rough numbers to go off as you're building out those comp plans. This is very much so valuable for those early stage companies, and measuring performance. And how do you measure performance across your sales teams? And measuring performance is important across the different types of roles people have. So you're measuring the velocity and the conversion through the sales funnels, because you can manage those activities in that process, but sometimes you can't manage the results. Penalizing SDRs for an AE not closing is not the SDR's problem, it's the AE's problem. And likewise, sometimes you might not have figured out that scalable, repeatable process yet. So if you want to keep your account executives engaged at early stage companies, you're going to need to compensate them accordingly and not just off of that revenue model. Here's some averages that you can kind of plug against some of your account executives and understanding what they're working on. On average, they're dialing 33 per day. Quality conversations are 6. Demos per week are 7. And then, as you might expect, the higher the average contract value, the fewer demos an AE is going to do per week. Generally, if you're starting to get into a field model, you're going to have demos where they're going to be more likely in person, so you're going to do even less per week because you are traveling to go do them. It's one of my favorite topics and something that's very important as we progress with technology and the sales enhancement tools that people are using. Here's kind of like an overview of the different tools that people are using at your, early stage. Most people are going to be using email automation, tracking, and cadence building. There are some amazing tools out there like SalesLoft, Apollo, Outreach that allow you to build out a process, messaging, put it on a cadence, track your results through it. So this is kind of one of your early adopters that most people are using. So as you grow, keep budget in mind for that one of your first tools you should be buying. On top of that, you'll need some contact data and account intelligence. So that could be through information providers. It could be LinkedIn Navigator as your substitution there, or it could be Discovery.org, or even Apollo has built-in a usage where you can prospect leads right within the tool. Next, you have your contract e-signatures, so to help you close your deals. And this, again, depends on the nature and the number of deals you're closing. If you're closing enterprise deals at $1 million plus per deal, you're not going to need contract e-signatures right out the gate. But if you're closing 100 deals a week, you're going to want to have something that automates and keeps track and documents, saves the process for you. It will save a ton of time. And as you can see, you can move continuing down the spectrum into LinkedIn Navigator, dealers, click the dials. Obviously, a lot of the new things that people are starting to use is call recording and conversation analytics, where it will use AI to help you understand what words are working when deals close, what words aren't, what phrases, helps you guide your team into the appropriate language that's going to help you get more deals done. Here are the most common packages for your different price points. So under $250, what most people are using, under $500, and that's per user, per sales rep, keep in mind, and under $1,000. So keep in mind, these are kind of what some of the packages that people are using out there as a guide. Last but not least is when you are ready to hire sales leadership roles, keep in mind where budgets are and how they're growing for people going forwards. A manager in sales, some OTE targets, director in sales, OTE targets, and then vice presidents in sales, some OTE targets to keep in mind. One thing I would say for those hiring their first VP sales in an early stage startup, there's, two types. And the one type of VP of sales fits into that superstar culture that I was referring to earlier, where they are the right fit for coaching and managing an existing process. And then there is the science VP of sales who is very much more focused on the process and the plan and the marketing material that's going to create and breed success amongst the team and help you scale your organization. So keep in mind when you are hiring for those two roles, who you're going to target first. And at that, I will wrap it up at this point. I'm sure there was a lot to take in at this. The presentation will be available. We'll be emailing it out to everybody and all the participants at the within 48 hours. And I'm glad everyone could join today. Feel free to ask some questions in the chat down below, and we will try and answer some of those as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to just scroll through some of these, and we'll start with some of the questions here. What are some of the things to look for when hiring your first rep? So I have a general rule when I'm hiring reps for my team, especially people who are going to be on the phone. I like to have them tell me a story. Storytelling is so much a part of sales nowadays that if someone can't take their hobby or can't take their passions and turn that into an engaging story where they can keep me on the phone for 5 minutes, then they're probably not going to last as a sales rep in this environment. Everybody needs to be able to tell a story and be able to relate to somebody to get them more engaged with the process. So that's what I like to do off the hop. If I like the resume, is get them on the phone and tell me a story before they'll get past any other stage. When should you hire your first rep? For those of who are tuning in from Canada, there's an interesting stat out there where in Canada, I don't know if it's by our conservative nature or whatnot, but we tend to invest 2/3 of our resources into development, where we want to build this amazing product before we sell it, versus in the US, 2/3 of the resources go into marketing and sales. I can't iterate how important it is to get out ahead of your sales numbers and grow your sales and marketing teams early before some of your product might even be ready, because sales cycles are long and you need to warm people up to that prospects of buying it. So investing in your team early and often is something that I think is not managed correctly in the Canadian landscape. So to answer that question in short, it should be done ASAP. When do you hire your first VP of sales? That is a great question. I kind of tackled that earlier in terms of, are you hiring someone to help you build and define your process, or are you hiring someone who's going to come in and help manage a team that's already existing? And understanding what those roles are and understanding how that person's going to impact your team. So just to iterate on that again, when I look at it from hiring a superstar VP of sales, they might have managed, eight directors before who are managing high performance teams, and they're very good at motivating and pushing them forward, but have never been on the ground and actually building and designing and building out your metrics and what your KPIs are across the spectrum. That's a different type of person who's probably had some more experience at some early stage companies, understands how to use your technology stack and how to get the most out of it. There are two different types of people. I would, for early stage companies, focus on someone with that background. And then as your team starts to grow, you absolutely need those superstar VPs in there to help encourage and grow that team even further. But the process needs to be defined in a scalable way before you can execute on that. I'm going to take one more question here. What are some of the differences that you think of when selling consulting services opposed to digital products? I guess the best way I think about this is in terms of the relationship you're going to have and the number of ongoing touch points you're going to have with your buyer. If it is a very transactional sale or you have a very automated solution, then it is a very different process on getting the person engaged. Again, it also comes down to defining Are my stakeholders the users of my product, or are my stakeholders the people who are just signing off on the deal and then delegating that down to a lower level person? So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of how to approach that, depending on what your success is. Data is kind of the key metric that's going to drive a lot of your sales, and understanding where they came from, what those users are, how they use them, talking to your early customers and understanding usage, feedback, sales structure, sales process of your early deals, and the data around those is going to help you and guide you to the path of least resistance to figure it out. I kind of mentioned earlier when we were talking about the inside sales team in the Toronto location acting as a localized sales team. The fact that this was right under my nose for a year and a half without realizing it kind of struck me when I had a chance to reflect on it. And it was quite apparent, but often you need that kind of 30-foot or 30,000-foot view to understand some of the things that are quite apparent for you. So, talking to your early stage customers and tracking the data about it and understanding the usage is kind of a key for success for growing out and scaling that sales process and design. All right. I'm going to wrap it up at this point. If there are some other questions, I'm going to go through the chat and take a look at them, and I will reach out to you guys separately and answer some of those questions independently. Really want to thank everybody for joining me today. Please, would love to hear feedback on the presentation, or if there's anything you think I would miss. Keep tuned for future sessions from Boast.ai. We are automating your shred claim process. We built technology that helps you claim your R&D and shred tax credits through software, or we tie into technical stacks and write reports. It is the cheaper, better, faster solution. So stay tuned for more from Boast.ai, and thank you everybody for joining today. We'll be in touch soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.